Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bailey Howard Leonard. I'm a board member with the Permian Basin Adult Literacy Center. And I want to thank you for joining our live author stream with Amy Stewart. And a big thank you to Southwest 66 Credit Union for sponsoring our 2021 live streams. Hi, Amy. How are you?
Hi, it's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
How's the weather in Portland?
Well, you'll be surprised to know that it's raining in Portland today. It's that time of
That's
year.
here in West Texas. We think the grass is green on the other side, so I think we would probably appreciate the rain a little bit. Can you introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about your history?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a writer, and that's pretty much been my whole career. It's my full-time job to write books, and I grew up in Texas. I was born in Dallas Fort Worth and grew up there, and then went to school at UT Austin. And I always wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't really sure, I guess, how that worked. So in my 20s and partly into my 30s, I worked a bunch of other jobs like people do, but after about my third book was published, I became a writer full time, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And I've written pretty much equal parts fiction and nonfiction over the years. So a lot of writers stick to one or the other, but I've been lucky that I've been able to do both.
And that's amazing. So what do you do in the morning? I'm always so fascinated by people whose job they get to be grown-ups and they get to write for a living. What is that? How do you schedule your day?
Well, I tell you what, I'm not much of a morning person. So in the mornings, I tend to do other things. Like I go and get some exercise, and I just sort of, I'm also an artist. So if I'm going to make art, that usually happens in the morning because I'm just sort of more in the right place for that. And it's usually not until after lunch that I really sit down to start working on whatever book I'm working on. And a lesson that I've learned over the years is that nobody can do really intense, focused, creative work for 8 hours a day. So 4 hours is about it. That's really about all most of us have to give. So from after lunch until dinner time is just about right for that. So during that time, I'm either researching or writing or taking care of some of the business stuff that comes up
Oh, yeah.
for a writer. So yeah, that's kind of how my day goes.
So before we really jump into it, adult literacy is our primary focus. Can you tell us a little bit why adult literacy is important to you?
Well, as a writer and a reader, what I spend my life doing is connecting to other readers, and it's one of the great things that's happened for me over the years with the books I've written is that I hear from people who tell me that a book I wrote has changed their life or helped their life in some way. So, for instance, I wrote a book about the global flower industry. Here, I'll show it to you. It looks like this. Oops, there it is. Where I went all over the world looking at how cut flowers are grown and bred and shipped and sold. And I've heard from people in the flower industry who said that they changed their career when they read that book. So that's happened. It even just happened recently with one of my novels. One of the characters in my novels was in a particular situation, and a woman wrote to me and said, I'm going through that right now. And it was so great to find that in your book, and it really made me feel better. So I love that. I love knowing that we connect to each other through books.
I love that. So you mentioned artistry. So before we jump into the literature, I did take a look at your website and I see that you are a painter and you offer classes. Can we talk about your art for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I got started painting when I was about 30. So I think some people think that you have to be born artistic, or you're born with a certain talent, or you're not. And I completely disagree with that. I started taking oil painting lessons when I was about 30, and I've been learning how to paint and draw ever since. Um, and it's something that I love to do because it's very different from writing. It's not wordy, it's not verbose. You can do it standing up, you can do it out in public, you can do it talking to other people, listening to music. None of those things are really possible for me as a writer. So I love how different it is from writing. And yeah, over the last couple of years, well, I first started teaching writing classes. And I started teaching online because there's certain things people always ask me about in terms of writing that I have actual answers to. So I thought, well, I'm going to make a little class and I'll show you how I do this. I actually have something useful to say there. And after I made a certain number of writing classes, I just happened to be on vacation in Mexico. And I thought, I'm going to try to film an art class because I'm down here in Mexico with my sketchbook and it's beautiful. So it'd be great to film down here. And my first art class was way more popular than my writing classes. And I thought, oh, well, I've been kind of shut up at home in the last couple of years. So I'm going to make some more art classes. And so that's something I've been doing to keep myself busy in this last year or two.
So, were you already doing that online prior to the whole wide world going crazy and doing everything online?
Yes, I had just started to teach writing classes online in like the fall of 2019 or so. So I was just getting into that, and I had always taught a writing workshop or an art workshop as well here and there in my travels over the years. But I wasn't like I'd never had a regular teaching gig. It was always just like a one-off little workshop.
And I love that you're doing that for yourself though, and I love that it took off when you just thought, "Hey, you know what? I'll just film this." I love stories like that, and that's always how the best stuff hits us when we're not expecting it.
Right.
Um, so I want to talk about you have a fascinating variation and expertise, and I want to kind of start talking about your books and your love of nature. What inspired the Drunken Botanist, Wicked Bugs, and Wicked Plants?
Well, I'll tell you, every one of my books has come out of the previous book. So it's always the case that you can look at the previous book and somewhere in there you will find the moment when I got the idea for the next book. And so I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Arlington, Texas, which was not a great place to garden. It was very hot in the summer, and I don't think anyone at my house did anything that you would call gardening. There was something called yard work that had to be done, and it was usually mowing the lawn, and that was my brother's job, and it was awful. But I moved out to Santa Cruz, California, and that's a great place to garden, right by the ocean. And I planted a garden for the first time, and so that became my first book, which was a memoir. Here, I'll show you. It was a memoir about my garden in Santa Cruz, California. And every idea for the next book came out of the previous one. And I just have been lucky to be able to kind of follow my curiosity and follow what I'm interested in, and then get to go write a book about it.
So I'm probably going to go out of order in asking you about these books, but I do want to go a little bit more in depth on some of these. Let Can you tell us a little bit about what is the Drunken Botanist?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a book about The Drunken Botanist is a book about all the plants that we turn into alcohol. Looks like that. And this is a book I wrote several years ago after a conversation I had with another horticulture writer. We had been in a liquor store. We were we'd gone for a little booze run together for a like a professional event we were having. We were going to serve cocktails. And I just started pointing out how all the plants, all these bottles were really full of plants, like, well, there's tequila, that's nothing but agave. And there's rum, and that's sugar cane. And there's gin, and that's got juniper berries in it. And so I just kind of went on this little riff about, oh, look at all the plants in this liquor store. And then I said, somebody really ought to write a book about this. It's kind of interesting. And he was like, yeah, why don't you write a book about it and shut up already? So that's kind of where the idea for the book came in. And it was at a moment in time about 8 or 10 years ago when the craft cocktail movement was really taking off. And in the bartending world, people were very interested in, like, what are these ingredients? What's in absinthe? What is in chartreuse? What are these plants, and how did they come to end up in this bottle? But they didn't have a lot of botanical expertise. But I don't have a lot of botanical expertise either, but I know a lot of botanists, and they were willing to talk to me. So this was a giant research project for me, putting the
A
whole book
research
together.
project with drinks.
Yes, research project with drinks for sure. Yeah.
You have the
Um,
best job. Yeah,
I
the
had
best
the best
job.
parties while I was writing that book. Everyone came to my parties because we would do things like we would do a vodka tasting with vodka made out of every possible thing vodka could be made from. So apples and wheat and rye, and you can make vodka from honey. And so we had all these kind of um, corn, for example. So we had all of these spread out, and people could come along and taste and compare. So yeah, it was fun.
I don't know how you got any work done. I feel like after a couple of viewing the plants, I would have just needed a nap. We do have a question regarding plants while we're on here. Did a weed really kill President Lincoln's mother?
Yes. So this is "The Weed That Killed Lincoln's Mother" is the subtitle of a book I wrote called "Wicked Plants," and it's about all the deadly, dangerous plants, illegal, immoral, horrifying, offensive plants in the world. And in every case, I didn't care that a plant could kill you. I wanted to know who it had killed. So the only plants that are in the book are the ones where I had an actual story about like who has been harmed by this plant. So Abraham Lincoln's mother died of something called milk sickness. And at the time, nobody knew what caused it. But now we know that what milk sickness is that if a cow grazes on this particular poisonous plant, which is white snake root, the cow gets sick, the poison ends up in their milk, and people can drink the milk and get sick and die. And of course, when Abe Lincoln was a little boy, um, you might just have the one cow, right? And that
Right.
cow, that's where your milk comes from. And that cow is wandering around eating whatever it can find. Today, our milk comes from cows that are on feedlots. We're drinking the milk of hundreds or thousands of cows combined into one glass. Their diets are very restricted, so it's not a problem anymore. But at that time, people did die of milk sickness, and it was a real tragedy. Abe Lincoln's mother died when he was only 9 years old, and I believe he also lost an aunt and an uncle to milk
Wow.
sickness at around the same time.
Well, I'm sure that Big Dairy appreciates you emphasizing this is not a current problem
It's
anymore.
not,
Don't
not
worry about your milk.
right.
Um, that actually brings us into I want to talk about wicked plants. So, thank you for telling tell us another cool thing. I'm weird about bugs and plants, so everything you're telling me just enforces danger
Right,
outside.
right. Well, yeah. So I got interested in kind of this the idea that there's this sort of dark side to the natural world. It's my job to go around and interview botanists and horticulturists and talk to them about their work and what they do. And I found that many of them had these odd little collections of poisonous plants sort of shoved off into the corner of the greenhouse somewhere. And they'd be like, "Now, don't tell my boss I have one of these, but." And it would always be some creepy thing. So yeah, I started to kind of collect those stories, and I thought it would be fun to do. And so Wicked Plants, that's this one. That one came first, and then it was followed by Wicked Bugs. And in both cases, I'm really just looking at poisons that come out of the plant world or out of the insect and spider world, and looking at who they have killed. So, for instance, Socrates was put to death. He was executed using hemlock as the poison. And the reason we know that today is that there were a lot of people around him when he died, and they described this kind of slow paralysis that came over his body. And
Mhm.
that's a classic symptom of hemlock poisoning. And hemlock is a plant that grows certainly up and down the West Coast. It's just a weed, it grows everywhere. It looks kind of like Queen Anne's lace, only with little purple spots on the stem. So it's kind of easy to recognize. But the point is, these plants are all around us. I mean, plants have to defend themselves somehow. They don't want to get eaten. If you were a plant, you wouldn't want to get eaten.
That's
So,
true.
what can they do? Well, they can't run away and hide. They're rooted in the ground, but they can inflict pain and suffering on anybody who tries to hurt them. So, that's what they do.
So I don't want to talk about bugs, but I feel like we need to talk about bugs. I don't want to, but I am fascinated by what's going on in Wicked Bugs. You said that came after Wicked Plants.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you that the great irony about these two books is that with Wicked Plants, I had too many plants that I could have included. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And I really had to narrow it down and just choose the ones that had the most interesting stories, or the book would have been 4,000 pages long. Because the fact is, plants very often employ some kind of defensive mechanism so they don't get eaten, right? So
Right.
it's just super common. And yet we really trust plants. We think that if it's green and it's growing out of the ground, then it's all natural and it must be good for us.
Green is good.
That's how we view plants. With bugs, we're terrified of them, and we run screaming out of the room with the tiniest little insect or the tiniest little spider. It was actually pretty hard for me to find enough insects or spiders to fill a book that could actually hurt someone, because most of them can't hurt us. Like, they physically can't break our skin. I mean, they're too small and weak to even be able to bite us. And even if they did bite us, it doesn't, for the most part, doesn't do any harm. So I really had to work to come up with enough. So it's funny, our fears are completely misplaced. I mean, we should be, for the most part, delighted to see most bugs because they do a lot of good in the world, and they're not harmful to us. And we should be a lot more cautious around plants. Like, I'll be on a hike with someone or walking through maybe somebody's garden, and they'll pull a leaf or a berry off of a shrub and go, "Here, try this." And I'm always like, "You know what? I'm good.
Yeah.
I just had lunch. I really, I'm fine."
I'm full. I'm
Um,
full.
I will not put an unfamiliar leaf or berry in my mouth. But most people would go, "Okay, like, it's green, it must be good." But that's really not true.
No. I always wonder, I often have this existential thing where I wonder what happened to the first people, the people that discovered acetaminophen, or uh, what makes alcohol, like the first few people that tried poisonous items, what made them go, I'll just put this in my mouth. I don't, it's curiosity is not a thing for me. So
Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm not going to eat any of my friends' gardens berries or anything like that. So you started writing, and you've done these amazing nonfiction books, and you've done fiction books, which is an insane load of work. I mean, they're completely different mindsets. It's a
Yeah.
crazy workload. It's what inspires you to write? What
That's
makes you
kind
go,
of
yes, this is what I will continue to do this. I enjoy this.
it's kind of a funny question because, it's hard work, and the thing about writing a book is it takes it's a process that goes on for a few years. So you have to really want to stick with it through the boring parts and through the parts where nothing's working. So I often ask myself the same question, like, why am I doing this?
But you
I mean,
push through it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the thing I always wanted to do, from the time I was a kid, and it's the thing I know how to do. And there's a lot of satisfaction in getting to the end. I mean, there's a lot of satisfaction to having this book in your hand, and you walk into a bookstore and there it is. So I love the finished product. Getting there is not always so easy. And, like, again, that's another thing I love about drawing and painting is that I can do a little painting, and I'm finished with it that afternoon. And it's like, here, look, done. Whereas, I embark on a new book project and it's going to be years before I see the finished product.
Yeah, but it's well worth it. So I want to move into your fiction realm now.
Mhm.
Let's talk about the Cop Sisters novels. What
Yeah. So I had been wanting to write fiction for a while. And in fact, there's a few failed novels in drawers, in between some of my nonfiction books. Because mostly I read fiction. So I was kind of like, well, I want to write the kind of books I read, in terms of novels. But I hadn't been able to kind of figure it out. I hadn't really made it work. And then I ran across this story by accident while I was researching something else in a newspaper from, a little over 100 years ago. It was just an article about a woman who, kind of had a run-in with a bad guy, and a really kind of nasty confrontation, and she ended up fighting back in a really interesting way and working with the local sheriff in Paterson, New Jersey, where she lived. And at the end of the whole case, the sheriff offered her a job, and she became one of the first women deputy sheriffs in the country. And she's a really remarkable woman in law enforcement. And no one had ever heard of her. I mean, even in the kind of the scholarship about the history of women in law enforcement, she's never mentioned. No one knows who she is. And so I got very interested in her story, and she has a couple of sisters. Their family stories are very interesting as well. And I kind of felt like, anyone could have found this story, but I'm the one who found it. And I started to feel a sense of obligation, like everyone forgot about them, and I owe it to them to tell their story again. I want other people to love them as much as I do. So I've written 7 books about them, and
Oh, wow.
they're almost all based on their true story. I stick to the true story as much as I possibly can.
So, do they still have family living? Like, have you spoken to how does that connection work? I had no idea there were 7. For some reason, I thought that there were 5.
Yeah, no, there's 7 now. Um, the thing with the family's been really interesting. The youngest of the 3 sisters, her I was able to find her son, believe it or not, who was in his 80s when I spoke to him almost 10 years ago. So I haven't done the math on his age lately. I haven't talked to him lately. I hope he's doing okay. But that was amazing to be able to actually speak to the son of one of the 3 sisters. And I also found a kind of like a grand nephew of as well. So yeah, there are some family members out there who were able to tell me some stuff, and they were very generous with their time and very open to the fact that here I am, a complete stranger, and I'm going to write not just one novel, but a bunch of novels about their family, which is sort of weird if you think about it. And even some of the minor characters in these books, I have tracked down their families and spoken to them as well. So a lot of these people are real. And if I can find their descendants, I find them and talk to them.
I have chills. I think that that is like my arm hairs are raised right now because I think that is so cool and so interesting.
Yeah.
So, without giving away any spoilers, can you tell our audience what happens in the Cop Sisters novels? What is the progression? What happens?
Well, sure, I can tell you. So the first one, I'll just show you the first one. It was called "Girl Waits with Gun," and that's an actual newspaper headline from when Constance was like waiting on a street corner with a gun in her handbag, trying to catch this guy who'd been harassing her family, threatening her family. So most of the books follow Constance's career as a deputy sheriff, and I have a lot of information about the real cases that she worked on. She was in the newspapers a lot. If a male officer arrested a bad guy and put him in jail, that might not have even made the paper. But if a woman did that, a lot of people thought that was hilarious. Like a lot of the newspaper coverage is kind of making fun of her.
How
It's
wacky.
Yeah, they're not impressed. They're sort of like, isn't this hilarious that a lady would arrest a male criminal? That just seemed nuts. But the good thing for me is it meant she was in the paper a lot, so I know what was going on. So I have her working on real cases through a lot of these books, and then I get to World War I, and I don't know for sure what the 3 sisters did during World War I. I just have a little hint. So I did veer a little bit more into fiction, but I put them in real places with real people and real events that actually happened in the war, so that there's still that element of wow, I can't believe this really happened.
I have to guess whatever they were doing during World War I was cool because that's I just finished a book about lady serial killers where they also are taken as a joke, which is
Mm,
oh crazy women doing crazy things. How hilarious!
right.
I love that you found this story. I love that the two things came together. I want to brag on you a little bit and mention some awards that you won, such as the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, the American Horticultural Society's Book Award. That's a hard one to say altogether. The International Association of Culinary Professionals Food Writing Award, and you're a New York Times bestselling author. How does that how does that feel? Does it feel real to you, or are you always just working on the next thing?
I mean, yeah, I think I am kind of always working on the next thing, but I'll say that everything that's happened in my career has been entirely unexpected, and nothing that I ever would have hoped for or set my sights on. You know, with every book, there's some new first where I think, wow, I never thought this would happen. So it's all kind of been one big surprise for me, to tell you the
That's
truth.
good. It keeps you guessing.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody who is wants to be like you when they grow up? Write books. What's your advice?
Well, you know, the big thing, of course, is to read and to read widely. You know, we all have our certain things that we love to read, but it kind of helps to try to branch out a little bit. So you might say, you know, if your favorite, you have a favorite author, you might ask yourself, well, who is their favorite author? Maybe I should go read that next. And then who's their favorite author? It's kind of like with bands, you know, you're like, I love this band. And it turns out that they were really influenced by this other band. I'm going to go listen to that band now. So, you know, it's kind of the same thing, but it helps to kind of read across genres. You know, I mean, it helps to read poetry and read whoever's winning the National Book Award or the Nobel Prize for Literature. Go read some of those books. Like read great writers across a range of genres. But really, you know, there's the I genuinely think that that the best training for being a writer is to read a lot and also to write a lot. It's kind of it's kind of just a matter of doing it and doing it a lot.
I think it's really refreshing that you think both art and writing are a lot of people do believe that they have to be born with this inherent talent and this skill. I love that you emphasize that it's teachable and you can do it.
Yes, yeah, it's absolutely teachable. I don't actually believe that there's any such thing as talent. I and you know, I actually I have a post about this on my website. I just moved recently, and so I'm cleaning a bunch of stuff out, and I found a drawing pad that somehow I've had since I was in my 20s, and I'd only ever drawn anything on the first page. And I didn't use the rest of the paper, and that drawing on that first page is terrible. It's a drawing of a lighthouse, and it's awful. And I show it to people now to say, if I had talent, this would have been a good drawing, right? Because if you have talent and you're born with it, then
It's
something
just
that I
there.
drew when I was 28 years old should be excellent. And it wasn't, it was terrible. But then I took a lot of classes and I learned things and I learned how to do it and it got better. So it's the same as driving a car or cooking a meal or anything else. Somebody has to show you. You have to learn and you have to practice and you have to be engaged in it. That's true. I've had people say to me, well, I tried that once and I was terrible at it. And it's like, well, of
You
course you're
tried
terrible
once.
at it the first time you tried it. But it's about practicing and also just kind of thinking about it a lot and being interested in it. I think somebody who takes an art class once a week and sort of hates it and doesn't think about it all week long is going to be in a very different place from someone who takes it and is really engaged in it and is constantly looking around and going, you know, the yellow on that tree is like a little darker than cadmium yellow. I think it actually probably has a little orange in it. And, you know, I'm not even making art, but I'm looking out my window at this tree and thinking about how would I mix that color. And so the same is true in books. You know, you're reading a book or even watching a movie. Very often with my husband, we'll be watching a movie and I'll be like, that is such a predictable plot structure for them to, you know, for them to do in this way. And why didn't they think about doing it this other way? So you're engaged with the idea of stories and thinking it through.
That's so what are you reading right now?
Well, so I always have a lot of kind of work related reading to do, you know, like books that I'm reading to help me write the next book I'm writing. But for fun, and also just kind of in the middle of the night, you know, if I'm not sleeping well and I just wake up in the middle of the night and I want to read something wonderful that'll help me fall back asleep. And I've been reading a lot of these British writers from sort of the middle of the 20th century. There's all these wonderful what today we would call women's fiction, although I don't know if they had that term in those days. So, like Stella Gibbons, who wrote Cold Comfort Farm, which is a fantastic book. And I recently found out that, you know, like Stella Gibbons has like 20 other books that I can get as ebooks. And so I tend to lay awake in the middle of the night reading Stella Gibbons novels because they're just very lighthearted and they're taking place in England and it's, you know, decades and decades ago. It just feels very removed from the present world. And so it's just a nice thing to read before falling asleep. So
And
those are
fiction is
pretty
such a
good.
nice escape.
Yeah.
It's so nice, especially in the world that we live in right now. It's
Yes.
so nice.
Yeah.
So if people want to know more, can you shout out your website? Are you on any of the socials? How do people find you on the internet?
Yeah, my website is just my name. So it's just amystewart.com. And you can find links to all the social media stuff there. But yeah, if you're an artist, I'm on Instagram. And again, it's just Amy Stewart is my Instagram handle. And you can find me on all of those other platforms as well. So yeah, stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to thank Amy so much for joining us today. Please check out her website, amystewart.com. Look her up on Instagram as Amy Stewart. You can find the books on Amy's website. You can find them at any major bookseller. You can also find them on Amazon. If you purchase them on Amazon, don't forget to purchase through smile.amazon.com to support the PBALC as your nonprofit of choice. And I want to say thank you again to Southwest 66 Credit Union for making all of this possible. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate you taking time out of the afternoon.
Thank you. It was good talking to you.